Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this, the 13th, believe it or not, in our series of P2 webinars. And today we're looking at a hugely important area of transformation management. We'll be looking at change management, and not just change management in a kind of a narrow sense, but very much what is new, what is exciting, what is next in the world of change. For those who've not been here before, my name's Adam Skinner, and I'll be discussing a range of things with you, and I'm joined very much with my colleague Kelly Hewson, who is our lead for change management. But before we crack on with the presentation, allow me to introduce P2 Consulting to you. P2 Consulting is, of course, the brand leading challenger consultancy that was set up about 7 years ago to be a real alternative to the forced comfort of the big four. We do that really by delivering on our 3 P2 promises to improve, to control, and to deliver on your transformation ambitions. And if you have a look at the next slide, Kelly, please, you'll see the services we deliver that allow us to do that. We're very proud of the fact we deliver right across the change spectrum. And of course, today we'll be digging into a very important area in the improve promise, and that's around change management. As mentioned, I'm Adam Skinner, Director of Consulting here at P2, and I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by a real expert in this area, Kelly Archer, one of our leading managing consultants. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Adam. Thank you for the intro. I have been in the change space now for over 20 years, and I had a lot of experience of change management and hoping to bring you some different perspectives here today. I'm also a member of the Change Management Institute, and also APM and various other professional bodies. So thank you for joining us today. To start off with, I'd like to talk about what change management is. There's a lot of different perceptions out there. For a lot of people, change management is the training at the end of a delivery, or perhaps it's an awful lot of talking and communications. And for some people, perhaps the change manager is just the slightly irritating person that fills up your inbox. But the main point is that change managers are absolutely essential to delivering embedded change, which requires a change in the behaviours of the individuals receiving that change. And managing business change is really about proactively taking advantage of change in order to deliver benefit for the organisation. And I think one of the things that I talk about most when I'm talking about change management is that benefit delivery, is the fact that no matter how effectively we deliver our product or our change in process or our reorganisation, if we don't change the behaviours of the individuals affected, we won't deliver the benefit intended. And those businesses who don't accept change and act on it often fail. So change management adds value in the space where it's addressing perhaps some resistance, it's really embedding that change. And P2's approach to change management goes that little step further. We believe that managing resistance is fantastic and allows us to drive forward that stakeholder engagement and awareness, but actually we're able to take that a little further and avoid resistance with a combination of minimising the impact and driving stakeholder ownership of the change, which results in an earlier adoption curve. Resistance can come in all sorts of forms. It can look a lot of different ways. It can be lots of people feeling like they don't understand what's going on, that perhaps the project or the deliverable may never work. It may be a personal fear, a fear that actually those threats that can be so important to our core needs are present within this change, that actually cost cutting might turn into job losses, or that perhaps the expense of a change initiative might be something that's personally felt by those individuals. It can just be an area of lethargy. It can be people that like the way things are currently and just don't want to change, or individuals who perhaps are a little overexposed to change. And at that point in their particular working lives, they feel like they're happy with the way things are. So change can come in all sorts of forms, and that unwillingness to change often comes down to fear of a lack of success of the new design, a perception that the cost is of the implementing the change is greater than the benefits, and a really low tolerance for uncertainty. But how do we go about doing that? What would we deliver in order to help? Well, if we're effectively engaging our stakeholders much earlier in the process, and we'll talk about how we do that in a second, if we're actually doing that successfully, then what we're able to do is to move the dial. And many of you will recognize forms of this diagram. This is our view on actually engaging different stakeholders at different points in the change cycle. And I'm sure we've all got people in our lives that are always looking for the bright new thing. Those individuals, we can harness their enthusiasm and actually have them as business representatives living inside the project very much before the point of the traditional go live model, which would have seen those individuals not engaged until after things are decided. And that loses some value. The next group of people we're looking at are change champions, the people who really start to establish a bit of a consensus around what might be interesting for their teams. They're the leaders, the thought leaders amongst their peers. And there's usually then a gap before you actually start to look at the majority of individuals that are affected by the change and how they might engage with it. I definitely fall into the early engager category myself. I'm sure we all see a representative of ourselves up there. I'm definitely the individual that buys the new iPhone a couple of weeks after it's gone live, once all the glitches have happened and Apple have updated their software a couple of times. So I definitely sit on the precipice wondering what's going on and observing a little while before I take the jump. But I'm also very much at the beginning of the majority. We have our late engagers, and in trying to harness the enthusiasm, obviously, of the people that come before those late engagers and actually repositioning our go live, then actually we're able to take quite a lot of the people on a journey with us through the project and mean that it's not far into that go live positioning, perhaps during your hypercare, that you actually start to achieve a critical mass and you're already into your late engagers and able to embed the change as quickly as possible. And obviously, as soon as the change is embedded, that's where you are starting to deliver the majority of your benefit. Depending on whether you've taken an agile or a waterfall approach, you may actually be amassing benefit as you go along. But all of the time you're going through engagement curves and you are embedding different activity within the individuals that are actually carrying out the tasks. P2 has our own standard change management and adoption approach. We use the term CDE to sum it up. The first step is about context. When we work with any organisation, and we work with many organisations delivering change, we immediately start to understand its landscape. That's about the business landscape, but it's also about the landscape inside of the organisation, about the different dynamics between different functional groups, the stakeholders, the way in which it's operating, the organisational direction, and we ask a lot of questions. So I always think that good consultants question an awful lot, and I certainly do. But the main reason that I ask so many questions is that I feel my principal role in change management is to advocate fiercely for the positive benefit and for the outcome of the initiative. And I can only advocate where I'm informed enough to be able to answer people's questions. It's perfectly acceptable to say, I'll come back to you if you do. But when the answer to the majority of the questions is, I'll come back to you, it undermines your standing in the minds of the people that you are trying to communicate to. Our second step is about design. We very much believe that change management is something that should be involved in a project or an initiative very, very early on, not as an afterthought, and certainly not as just an add-on to deliver training or do an evaluation of how you communicate out and output. If you involve your change managers early enough, there are lots of benefit that you can get from that. Your change managers can help you with your design. They can be your bridge between the business and yourselves, and they can help you to understand where the actual business as usual is varying throughout the life of your project. There's lots of work you can do around process, impact, and communication at the design stage that puts you ahead of the game. Within our change management model, we then focus obviously on enabling the individuals affected to accept the change. And that enabling activity does look at some of the traditional training and learning needs analysis type activities, but how we deliver it might be considerably different to what you might expect. And I think also another key point to think about is learning reinforcement. That's part of our standard model at P2, because so often we see that change has been preceding the initiatives that we are undertaking, and perhaps the change has been delivered, but the reinforcement isn't there. The reinforcement is making sure that all of the new staff members that come to an organisation understand how to do that too, by maybe thinking about induction processes and standard interactions. It's about making sure that the change sticks and that an organisation isn't going through a cycle every 3 years of changing their finance system. And perhaps we've all worked with organisations that have that sort of behaviour of the grass always being greener. So that's our standard model, but that's just the basics. The reality is that research suggests that only 34% of changes at the present time are considered a clear success, with 50% failure, and the remainder having mixed results. And it really isn't moving the dial hugely, since the statistic that we all quote, that 70% of projects fail, back from 1993, when Hammer and Champy did their research. So one thing we have got good at is different ways of delivering outcomes. And we invest a lot of time and thought into looking at agile, scrum, iterative, where waterfall is completely appropriate, because it is in some spaces, and all sorts of different delivery methodologies. We've got slicker at delivering, we are clearer at what we're trying to deliver, so why is that dial not moved further? If 70% of projects failed in 1993, with all of the new learning that we have done, all of the training that we do, the investment in project managers, in analysts, etc., why are we now only saying that actually we can only say it's a clear success in 34% of cases? It's still not a significant move. Other research suggests that actually change management may help move that dial. So of projects effectively applying change management, in the ProSci study that we looked at, 94% met or exceeded their project objectives. 81% were under budget and 71% were ahead of schedule. Sounds pretty positive, doesn't it? So I guess we must have to do more change management. One study actually showed a significantly higher return on investment of projects which had sophisticated change management programs. And 135% ROI is a pretty strong driver to actually engage. further change. There are other studies out there, but nonetheless, there's a very strong message now that change management perhaps is the missing piece in really moving that dial at least to 50%, if not further, in favour of successful projects. Within P2, we use our Change Management Plus services to really enhance the change management we're delivering and look to target and help target within our clients specific areas of need that support them, not necessarily just within an individual project or an individual program, but on a wider sense within their organization, support their capability in delivering change for the future. The 4 areas that we focus on are firstly sponsor coaching, in supporting C-suite leaders and their offering and how they offer challenge to delivery and board level assurance. Transferable skill design, which is really about making change easier within your organization, and where you have choices, making the systems, processes and structures similar, and that familiarity reduces the burden of change management. Gamification for engagement and learning, and continuous needs alignment. That's, once again, as I mentioned earlier in our base model, really a process that we do to make sure that we establish that relationship between the basis for the project or the program and actually the benefit it's going to deliver relating to the business area that it will affect. I'm going to talk about these 3 in a little bit more detail. So let's talk about transferable skill design. It's the basis for a program or project that actually delivers something that fits into the business that is receiving it. Throughout the design process, there are so many choices to make, so many options, and some of those will significantly ease the adoption and the operational efficiencies that can be achieved. Really small choices, such as using existing meeting structures as part of the communication or process steps, can mean that actually you don't create blocks in people's diaries or obstacles to engagement. You could use an existing super user base and process experts from other systems so that actually the expertise around systems and processes is held within less points across the business. And why reuse those models? Though they may already be individuals' responsibilities, and you may already have engaged individuals within those roles who are actually already trusted advisors. So that gets you past some of the necessary but and expected resistance that you may experience. Next, positioning software functions in a way that's similar to previous systems. The example I always use is Microsoft. If you use a Microsoft product, even if it's one that you have not used before, you'll find that actually you know how to use the basic features. You know where the save is, you know how the file structure works, how to open a file, where to find help. All of that is so familiar to you that you're not necessarily required to be trained on it. The overhead of training can be a very extensive cost for a business. And more importantly, the lag between the existing system and a system that is the aspirational system may actually be increased by the amount of training and the complexity that it's perceived to have. So if we can minimize that very much at the beginning, that gives us a real lead start. Next, recognizing existing structures of representation within organizational groups. How do I get people engaged in my project? Are there people already that choose to represent their teams that would be the ideal person to go to, that are trusted advisors? Very similar to our super users, but there's all sorts of ways of making sure that the business does work closely in that way. I'll talk about it again in a second, but often people reflect on the fact that within an agile methodology, you always expect the business representatives to be co-located with the coders. though in reality, that happens very infrequently. So how do you find individuals that have the time and already have the capacity to represent their team and to actually communicate back with them and have that good relationship in place? How do you minimize the burden on those individuals within the business and make it part of their existing choices? Lots and lots of decisions around that, lots of opportunity around designing with transferable skills in mind, whether that's on the skills side or actually within the structures of what you're operating. So that can be quite exciting. The next one, sponsor coaching. I've chosen to look at sponsor coaching second because actually the sponsor coaching piece is really, really important. However, not all of our clients feel like they need this. Some have very, very good sponsors who are already quite skilled in what they do. But very, very often, the strength of a project and the ease with which it negotiates the inevitable major issues that will come up as you go through any change. There's always those unknowns that you're facing. The ease with which we go through depends on the strength of your sponsor, because your sponsor should be two things to any transitional organization. It should be, your sponsor should be the person who challenges what you're doing for your own benefit, your critical friend. Your sponsor should understand enough about what you're doing to be able to know that it is the right thing for the business and fits with the mandate, and also be able to represent back to the organization on your behalf. So we seek to provide our C-suite leaders with the tools and techniques to provide high quality sponsorship of change. That's a whole variety of different things that we do. And also the knowledge and understanding needed to lead a successful delivery of policy or strategy and to deliver initiative to target. And that's really what our sponsor coaching service is about. The next one is continuous needs alignment. Our focus throughout delivery is not solely on stakeholder communication or engagement, but as I said previously, on stakeholder ownership. But how do you drive ownership? Well, if your stakeholders are in the room with you throughout the project and feel like they have a partnering relationship with you, then obviously that drives a certain sort of responsibility on their part to make sure that the product is fit for purpose. In doing that and giving them scope to shape the outcomes to the changing operational landscape early, responsibility to notify the project of change, and actually to give feedback before capability has been delivered. You avoid the idea of doing a user acceptance test at the end that creates a massive backlog or technical debt, because the voice of the individuals affected is very much within the project and part of that best practice. Stakeholders who feel part of the project and own the outcomes are therefore our early adopters and drive the adoption momentum. It should be them that really lead the charge, actually potentially front any training that's needed, are the people that provide some of the messaging back to the rest of the organization. And that will help to embed the product or the outcome into the organization, because of course when it's led by somebody that is of the permanent structure, it has far more impact. There are existing relationships, a greater level of trust, and also that can potentially help with leaving a really positive legacy behind from the change and a greater understanding that allows to build stronger future change. Moving on lastly to gamification. Gamification is the process of enabling learning through doing and presenting learners with model scenarios in which they can participate. There was a time a few years ago that gamification was a real hot topic in the training world. And a lot of that was based on computer game format learning. I've worked with one very large international organization with whom they've actually produced their induction in the form of a computer game in which you actually build their business, you watch what's happening to the share price as a result of the choices you make, etc., etc. And that's a good way for them to induct an awful lot of staff. But that's expensive, and that's not always appropriate for every little change we might have. Some changes might be much, much smaller. For example, within one notable company, I went out and did some facilitated role plays all around the world within some workshop environments for their staff. To do that might have felt like perhaps a waste of time for some particular sorts of changes, but this change was the implementation of a resourcing tool. And for most of the people that were being asked to change the way they work, it didn't really add a huge amount of value for them, and they didn't really see what opportunity it offered them. By facilitating the role play, all the individuals affected by the change were able to put themselves in the shoes of other players within the change, and as a result, they started to see the greater benefit and the bigger picture. And actually, that was really, really successful, and people were excited to do it. Within a 60-minute meeting slot, we were able to actually change people's perceptions and actually get them on board with a change in an admin system that they've never met before that affected 8,000 individuals. And that took only 30 workshops. For 8,000 individuals affected and the amount of money that was being changed by the implementation of that tooling, it was a really effective use of time. Desktop gaming kits can also be used. I've seen people actually create their own board games. And there are so many other things you can do. So gamification doesn't always have to be on an IT basis. But although the change managers are doing all these fantastic things, and we are taking a lot of responsibility for delivering benefit, no one succeeds in a vacuum. Change management and adoption sit in a bigger picture. For example, with working with PMO teams on the communications, frequencies, and audiences. Very importantly, working alongside the program managers, really helping track benefit realization, changes in the benefit profile through changes in the project, stakeholder management, and so much more. Working alongside project managers to help facilitate some of that engagement, and also perhaps to do some delivery coaching around the agile space that helps support how those individual drops of functionality can be landed most easily and actually adopted into the BAU to fuel the next cycle. Working with the business analysis team from an as-is to-be perspective on change impacts, user stories, and also process maps. And in the same sort of way with testing to support a much fuller testing picture, facilitation of user acceptance testing, and more. That's a real run through what P2 service are, but we'd also like to know what your change pain points are. So for the first time in our webinar, this time we'd like you to share some of your change pain points and join us for a change management surgery, which will be run on Thursday, the 1st of October. We're hoping to give you a chance to discuss with us approaches and best practice with myself and other experts around how we would go about addressing the sorts of problems that you might have within your business, within your project, or have experienced historically and just want a different perspective on. We hope that that would be interesting to you. And if you would like to save your spot or submit a question, please do email info@p2consulting.com. Over to you, Ad.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Kelly. That's a really interesting walk through the area, and a really interesting walk through what I think is an area that's often overlooked in change in transformation management. It's so much more than just asking the business what they want to see at the end of it. And thank you, Kelly. Do please join us for that surgery. It's going to be really interesting conversation to hear back from you. And judging by the number of questions we've received, it's clearly an area that's of a lot of interest to the people on the call. We will, of course, answer all the questions you've sent in. There's no time in the webinars because there's a sort of a tight half hour, but we do, of course, come back afterwards. So if you have any final questions, do feel free to drop them in. And that's about it from us. We'll obviously send out the webinars to all the attendees, so you'll get access to this webinar. You can watch it at your level or share it on with people you think might be interested in it. We'll be back in 2 weeks on the 8th of October, looking at turning ideas into digital outcomes, making agile work. That's going to take a really interesting look at agile from the end to end, and something we call pragmatic agile. So how do you apply agile if it's something new, if it's a slightly immature space you're working in, something that we do quite a lot of. Apart from that, that's about it really. So thanks for joining us, and please do have a wonderful weekend.